Hey guys, welcome to a series of videos that I'm publishing here on YouTube that are snippets from my membership website, fromthefield.farm. Today's video is all about retail markets, and this is just 15 minutes of a 1-hour video talking about retail markets for small farmers and market gardeners alike. It's part of a 7-part series that I did exploring all these different types of market streams, from restaurants, CSAs, farmers markets, to distributors and all kinds of stuff like that. Also, leveraging social media and things like this. A lot of the videos that I publish From the Field are myself just interviewing a farmer at a farm, or sometimes I might be talking to them on Skype, or sometimes there are videos like this where it's just me in front of a camera delivering some content in the form of a keynote presentation or something like that. So if you guys like this and you want to see more stuff like this, head over to fromthefield.farm and check it out. I only open the membership 4 times a year, and if you're seeing this video close to the time that it was published, this one is open from April 5th to April 19th, 2019, and I hope to see some of you guys in there. All right, guys, welcome to part 4 in our marketing series. And it looks like this is going to be actually a 6-part series. There's way more to this stuff than I originally had. And it's not that I've just made this stuff up. It's just that there's so many more things to embellish on in here. And I think when I've taught workshops and stuff like that in the past, a lot of this stuff kind of comes out in different ways as we go through the week in these workshops. But since here we're really focusing in on these specific subjects, there's a lot to it. So this one, in part 4, we're going to delve into the retail markets, looking at the grocery stores and all that stuff, which I never thought would have been actual reasonable market streams to sell in for a small farmer, but food trends change, and they are now. So let's jump into it. So before we jump into this one, let me just give you a bit of backstory on my experience with retail markets, and then we'll kind of jump into the details. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, even, if I thought retail markets like grocery stores and things we're going to talk about in here were a viable market for market gardeners and small farmers, I would have said, not on your life, not a chance. But the market has changed. The demand has changed. There's a lot of more customers that are demanding these kind of products at these grocery stores. And right off the bat, we're not talking about conventional grocery stores. We're not talking about Vaughn's or Safeway or the big mainstream grocery stores. I'm trying to think of ones in the US. In Canada, it's things like Sobeys and Save-On and stuff like that. You're just really standard grocery stores. We're not talking about those ones. We are talking more about ones that are in the Whole Foods vein. But we might not even be talking about Whole Foods, because Whole Foods might be a little bit too big, or Trader Joe's or things like that. In British Columbia here, I sold to 2 different franchises called Nesters and Choices. They're both quite mainstream, but they do cater to niche markets. So we're somewhat in the middle. We're not all the way on the mainstream ones. We're not talking necessarily even the tiny green grocers, though those would fit into this. We're talking about these sort of newer ones that are growing, and they're looking at local stuff. And so how I got into this was, I'd been selling at farmers markets for a number of years. I started selling at retail, I think it was about my 7th year of farming. I ran Green City Acres as a full commercial enterprise for 9 years. So it wasn't till about, the last 2 years we were really ramped up the retail stuff. And before that, I tinkered with little green grocer stores, independently owned places like that. Never really had much success with them. Never really moved a lot of product at those stores. But it wasn't until my 7th year where I had produce managers at these stores come to me and say, hey, are you interested in selling at our stores. And right off the bat, I was like, no way, you guys can't, you want to sell the product too cheap. And I was kind of arrogantly dismissing them. And so I had to explore it a little bit in conversations. And really what it came down to was there was a couple keen people at these retail stores that really wanted to give it a try. And I said, okay, you know what, let's just see. And so when we really analyzed the numbers, I found that we could make money at this. So where we started was I essentially went and looked at what was already on the shelf at those stores. So I was primarily looking at, my competition was Earthbound, pretty much like Earthbound Organics out of California. They were selling in a retail clamshell just like this. And they had a variety of different products on the shelf. They had a 5-ounce one just like this. And then they had an 8-ounce container. And then they had sometimes a 12, and then they had a 16. But primarily they had a 5, an 8, and a 16-ounce container. And so the price of the 5-ounce on the shelf was $4.99. The price of the 8-ounce container was something like $6 or $7.99, and then the 16-ounce, which is a 1-pound container, that was around $8.99 to $9.99. So right there, I knew that it wasn't very likely that I could sell my product to compete with the 8-ounce and 16-ounce containers, because those prices were probably a little too cheap. However, I will tell you in this little story before we get into the details of this that I later discovered that I could. But that took some working up to. So my main target of competition was the 5-ounce container, because the retail was $4.99. And the produce managers were more than happy to explain to me that they were paying about $3 for those. So I thought, well, you know what? $3 for 5 ounces isn't too bad, because that arrives at around $8 a pound. And I knew that I could produce this product at that price. And so that's where we started. And so basically what we did was, with cooperation with them, because like they did want to feature a local product. And so what we did was we set my products up right next to where the Earthbound stuff was. And so the idea was that we want to capture the eye traffic. And because the customer experiences, they go into the store and they know what they're looking for. They're looking for that salad mix product. And then they see Green City Acres product in the clamshell. For 5 ounce, it's the same price as the Earthbound, but it does look a lot better. And it's not certified organic. You know, we weren't certified organic, but we're saying, hey, we grow local, we use clean compost, whatever. That's what we have on our label there. And people were willing to take the risk. And so they did. And they bought our product, and then pretty much from there on, we outsold all the 5-ounce Earthbound containers at the 2 stores we were selling at. Actually turned out to be 5 stores. So much so that they stopped carrying the 5-ounce Earthbound because it just wasn't selling anymore, because ours completely outsold theirs. And so that was the idea. It was like, get them in the door, get them using the product, and then they're stoked. And so I'll break down the prices of all this stuff later into this presentation, but that's basically where it started. And, we even changed things later on. Like we started putting barcodes on. We did that in our last year. And, and what was also funny with what we did too was I didn't really want to use these clamshells to begin with, because they cost 50 cents each. And that's a big chunk of plastic. And so I wasn't really enthusiastic about it. But my original plan was, let's just mimic what's already there with Earthbound, so that so it doesn't cause customer confusion. Because I've sold salad mix in bags at farmers markets forever, and CSAs and all that, and that's what I wanted to use, because it's, they cost 2 cents each, and they are easier to recycle. And so, that aligned more with my values and with the economics of the product as well. Whereas, I was selling this container at $3.15, but it costs 50 cents for the container. So, I'm down to, what is that, $2.65 of what I'm actually making on that product. So it's still, we still made money on it. But the idea was, let's start with the container. I bought 10,000 of these containers. And what we did was, we kind of told a little white lie to the customers. And it wasn't a total lie, because I did have people email me that says, hey, Curtis, they email Green City Acres and say, hey, I've been buying your stuff from the farmer's market for years and I love your guys' product, but I have to say I'm a little bit disappointed that you're using these big plastic clamshells. I got 1 or 2 emails like that. And I agreed with them. I said, hey, I'm sorry, I apologize, but we're trying to just get into the market and we're eventually going to change to bags. And so that's what we did. So when I ran out of those 10,000 containers, what I did is I made a little sign that the produce stores allowed me to put up for a period of time, because we're transitioning to bags. So I'll show you some pictures of the bags we did later. Same label and everything, same product, just in a bag. Cut our cost by 47 cents or 48 cents. And we said, you've asked, we've listened. A number of customers have expressed sort of a disdain with the fact that we're using these clamshell containers. We couldn't agree more. So from here on, we're going to change to a lower impact, packaging, and we're going to use these bags. And so it's the same product at the same price, but less plastic. And they loved it. And so from there on, our numbers only increased. So we started with the clamshells essentially to compete with what was already there, get people using the product, get the market share, then transition to the bags, and then it's all the same. So that's kind of how it went. Like I said, we just started with these clamshells at the beginning, and I like to use them for branding photos because they look good, and it looks the part. It looks like what people are used to, and there's a lot of value in that. So that's where we started, and that's kind of how we got into it. And I'll kind of go through more of the details here as we go through this presentation. So some things to consider before you get into selling to retail. What you really got to look for is, are you producing product that you have volume in consistently, right? And so that's why I started with greens. All we sold at grocery stores was salad mixes, microgreens. We did sell tomatoes, and we did sell carrots, and I'll talk about those individually when we get to them. But those were things that I knew I could produce. So these are just, this is all just from my perspective, right? I mean, like, there's other things that somebody else might have experienced that they might say, hey, well, Curtis, we did it this way and it worked for us, and that's great. All the power to you. But this is just what worked for me. This is how we got into this. And so, really that's what I was considering. It was like, what can I do in volume that I'm going to have consistently? So there was a lot of products that wouldn't have worked for. Pretty much everything else we did on the farm, I know greens and I know microgreens inside and out. Those are the two main things we did. We did the other things here and there, or sort of in a season, a concentrated seasonal period. But it was greens and microgreens we focused on because I knew I could scale those. My production systems were dialed in. I had absolute confidence on what I could produce week in and week out. The other thing you want to consider is, how flexible are you with your margins? Because once we talk about prices, you're going to see that, retail wants, 50% or something like that to add on. So you got to make sure that if you're going to sell a product to the grocery store, that you have some flexibility in your margins. Other thing you want to consider, and this is certainly something new that's just happened recently as I have taken a significant break from farming, are you GAP certified or food safe? There's a lot of regulations coming down the pipe that you're going to be kind of forced into, unfortunately. And it's not even so much about government oversight. It's more about retail oversight, insurance liabilities and things like that. In Canada, all the major retailers are saying anybody who sells to grocery stores, like commercial grocery stores, especially the franchises, because they can regulate those ones easier, has to be GAP certified. So the stores are enforcing it. And so they're saying, if you want to sell product to us, you have to be GAP certified or food safe, kind of the same thing. And I know in the US there's similar regulations there, but in Canada they're really bringing down the hammer there. And another thing, this is just like a question for yourself, is, are you prepared for repetition? Because selling to grocery stores, it's bagging individual units. It is quite repetitive and monotonous. There's benefits to that too, in the sense that, like, It's a lot of the same stuff day in and day out. It's predictable. It's a lot easier to manage from a production standpoint. So there's pros and cons to that. Another thing is, do you have a good system for invoicing? You really need to. If you're going to start engaging customers like this, consistent sales and all that, you really got to have a good system. I recommend things like QuickBooks, something like that. FreshBooks, QuickBooks, more or less the same thing. You got to have a consistent system for invoicing, and you really got to have a system for when you arrive at that store, where does that invoice go and who is the one signing for it. This is actually more complicated than it is with restaurants, because with restaurants, which we're going to talk about in our next video, but this is, you got employees here who are paid minimum wage. And what's happened to me in the past is an invoice gets dropped off, the employee has no idea what to do with it, it gets lost, and then you talk to the accounts payable people and they're like, well, I never got that invoice. So what you have to make sure, and what we arrived at later on after a number of months doing this, was a hybrid system, because we did go paperless with QuickBooks Online, which is great, and we use that for most of our customers. But with the grocery stores in particular, what we found was the best was to have a paper invoice for them. So we would show up with the paper invoice. I made sure that went into the proper inbox. So the produce manager, usually in these produce stores, has an inbox where their invoices go. You want to make sure that goes there. So if it's some new employee that you've never talked to and you're dropping off product and they don't know what to do with that invoice, you say, hey, let me just show you I know where this goes. That goes in there. You get a signature from somebody. And for us, that was just on our phone, using QuickBooks Online. We have the invoice on the phone. They sign on the phone, and then that goes into our system, which does make it easier later on if you have to pull invoices to prove signatures. And there you go. So it's sort of a hybrid. Where some of the restaurant customers and all that, we were able to go fully paperless, and we didn't need to bring the invoice. But because the grocery stores there's turnover, there's a lot of employees that just don't know what's going on. You really want to cover your bases there. So that's a big consideration there. So those are things to consider before you get into retail.